So I thought I would make a short video to talk a little bit about how I make videos and the process in which I do it. I've turned my computer 90 degrees so that you see my library behind me. And essentially my process has been relatively unscripted. I do make a small outline before each video or browse my notes. I don't really script, I don't read anything. It's just kind of me speaking to you. So you'll have to forgive the kind of structure for now. I hope to bring more structure to what I'm talking about, and not in the way of overly ordering it, but in being able to explain some of the ideas that I'm thinking about. And I know some of it gets a little heady and some of it gets a little heavy, but there's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's an important time that we talk about some of it. There's construction happening outside, so sorry for the noises outside. Um, I think in general, the issues around digital space that I'm interested in are largely to do with how we practice creatively in this digital, what I call the infosphere. I've referred to that previously, maybe in my thesis. Um, in terms of, let me put my focus mode on here. Um, there's so much to be said about the good the internet can do. People think about these ideas in terms of free will or lack of free will. I don't believe that applies at all. I think we live in a world of objects. We live in, and objects are thoughts. Thoughts are objects. Or we can treat them as such. It might be representational to just treat them as such, but there's a way in which we don't always know the answer. We don't always know the best path. The universe is full of mysteries. We should acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that we don't know everything. I don't know everything. I've read books. I tend to skim through topics and things like that. I'll sometimes open a book to a random page and learn something from it. But in general, I have a hard time kind of working through material really procedurally because it's not how I think. And everyone's different. So I think the internet plays into that kind of sense of ADD sometimes, where you can find anything quickly, and it reinforces beliefs that actually aren't productive. We can, I think, improve that as a society. I don't know the answer of how to do that necessarily yet, but imagine an internet that was ethically informed, and I believe parts of it are. If you imagine the internet to be everyone's dreams floating in this kind of field of 3D space, that's kind of what it's becoming. I mean, there's so many people interested in doing good work, work that heals the planet, work that reinvents things, work that maybe is overly technological in its approach, but there's things to be learned there as well. I tend to approach my creative process by spending a lot of time thinking and less time drawing, and it's almost like this Venn diagram where one of those things is smaller than the other. And my process is always trying to equalize them. Like imagine like a big parenthesis and a tiny parenthesis, and trying to make them the same size. So part of why architecture, to me, I'm framing this channel around architecture, is because I think in spatial analogy or metaphor sometimes. And as architects, we tend to rest on that as a practice because it helps us think, both about what I mentioned previously in my first video about scale, about the implications of our decisions, spatial decisions on a design, and then this local versus global idea. Maybe that's a little overload, but it's an important one. There's a way in which nature knows how to do some of this stuff and you could argue we are nature as well. And so we don't need to fret. We don't need to worry about the right answer. And things aren't going to be perfect. They're never going to be perfect. I suffer from perfectionism. I have probably my whole life, or since I was young. And it's always getting past that, getting over that, and being okay with a new way of thinking about creativity. That takes various forms. Sometimes it's writing for me. Sometimes it's making a little sculpture or a model. I used to do that a lot more when I was younger, modeling things. We model things all day as architects, oftentimes now in 3D softwares. But the CAD programs that emerged in, let's say, 80s and 90s, even before that, when computers were first used to draw, in my understanding, and I have more to learn about that history, it was a challenge to the status quo in some ways. And I think the new technologies that we're seeing emerge are also a challenge to the status quo in a way that challenges architectural thinking in a productive way, tries to make it more connected to the process of creating and things like that. But there are challenges there are pressures that push against us creative individuals that are maybe invisible, that others wouldn't see approaching it from a technological perspective. I'll give you an example. Poetry. For me, writing poetry comes from all kinds of different inspirational space. It could be a thought, it could be an exchange I had, it could be looking at a plant in my backyard like I'm doing right now, or a memory. And those things, scientists are working on, like mapping the whole human brain and all this, and maybe some of that is productive, but maybe some of it is counterintuitive. It doesn't need explanation. I don't believe consciousness requires that level of detail of explanation. Albert Einstein, whose image is on the back of my laptop because he's just such a figure, and the old story, if you could have dinner with 3 people and invite 3 people from history, I think he'd be one of them that I would like to talk to. Because he was a determinist in a way, as far as I understand, but not entirely. And determinism is this interesting approach to reality that says, well, everything's already been decided for us. It's kind of like a rejection of responsibility that we have for nature. I don't buy into that. I think we need to be alive in nature. We need to think with nature. We need to use tools that nature provides us in a way that's responsible, in a way that is connective to larger spheres of thinking and meaning. And circling back a little bit to the thing about architectural tools like drafting, those tools will evolve, they will change, and so we should be adaptable as architects, I think. Not overly so. We should not rest on our laurels to say things will never change in the profession. It's more about understanding a way of thinking, in my view, and it's something I'm exploring further in the channel. But I don't know. That's kind of my Friday afternoon, midday thoughts for now. But those are some of the topics that interest me, aside from everything I've already mentioned. I know I'm listing more interests than I am solving and defining things, but I'll tell you a short story and then I'll sign off. My dad loved antiques. We lost him to cancer in 2005. It was very sad. He suffered from intestinal cancer and passed away. It was very quick. We didn't know how quick it would be. And because he loved antiques, he would go to these, we were born in Minnesota, we'd go back there in the summers. We would collect these, he would collect these antiques that he found in these old barns and things like that. He also loved old cars and classic cars. And he would never modify them. He would always try to keep them in their original state so that maybe that they had their maximum value or something, I don't know. But he had a traffic light that my mother gave me from our storage, and it's a walk, don't walk sign. And I love this idea that we exist in a world of seeming dichotomies and seeming symmetries. And our eye is drawn to symmetries and dichotomies, or our mind is, because they reflect something in us. We are more or less symmetrical. Not perfectly symmetrical, but we're more or less symmetrical. And this idea of symmetry is a recurring theme, both in art, even in, dare I say, psychology, like the Rorschach test or something. And it's a way of eking out further information in something. Think about like a butterfly or a tree. A tree might grow somewhat symmetrically, but it does so based on a pattern. And what I mean by pattern is almost seemingly a mathematical idea, that the tree is using its cellular structure to grow in a certain way via its tree DNA, right? And there's an order to that, actually. Nature has already these magnitude of order. So we need not use human order to impose anything on nature, although we do it all the time. We build massive pieces of infrastructure. We impose on the earth all kinds of things that are, you could argue, crimes against the earth. Now that's going to lose part of my audience who would say, well, you think freeways are evil and you're such a hippie. fine, you can label me as a hippie, I really don't care. The idea that we, though, tap into those things that we find meaningful and interesting still is a generator of knowledge and generator of interest in curious minds. And as a teacher, as a professor, I teach at Arizona State University. I teach architecture there, as well as I work full-time practicing architecture. Although I'm not licensed yet, I'm working on that. The notion that there's a symmetrical relationship between professor and or learner and learned, right? Like the reciprocal relationship that comes from knowing someone who cares deeply about the same things that you do is so productive and so beautiful. A friend of mine called me today, and we had this amazing conversation about, nature and what does nature do? What is it after? What is it? And the answer is nothing. Nature doesn't seek much. Nature wants to survive and thrive and grow. And obviously there's cycles to that, right? There's birth, life, death, renewal. And religions struggle to explain this, I think, in a large way. Like, they do try to explain it. And kudos for that effort, because without stories and without narratives of what things mean, we would be lost as a species. So we should continue to deeply understand, I think. I'm not a terribly, I guess you could say, religious person, but I do describe myself as spiritual in the way that what we experience nature to be is a sort of godlike force in some way. It's so mysterious. How our thoughts emerge to us, how we see patterns in nature, seems sometimes it's like it's all connected somehow into this kind of larger sphere of something beyond what I call the infosphere. The infosphere is a human construction of how the internet connects everybody. But the infosphere has begun, you could argue, through AI and through other means, to dream. That's fundamentally interesting. Werner Herzog said, the internet begin to dream of itself. I love that beautiful idea. So how do we care for nature? How do we care for ourselves? How do we slow down and take the time that we need? And the video this morning about meditation, I think, gets to some of that. So if you'd like to watch, please refer to the video where I begin kind of meditating. But parts of this are active, the thought process that we work through things, and that's part of the origin of why I'm making these videos. So thank you all for listening to my ongoing kind of ramblings. When I first posted the videos, I said I would get more narrowed or more specific in my aims or my goals. But I'm beginning to lay out goals. I think I'm starting to clarify them for myself, and everyone, I hope, will do that. What motivates us? What drives you? What exists outside of the metaphor of, say, an automobile, where you're just walking through a forest and you have a sense of calm? Or even if you're driving somewhere, what do you think about? Another short story, and then I'll sign off, more delay. I was driving through my old neighborhood one time with my mother, and she started telling me all these stories about when I was a child. So there's a connection that we have with modality, like space and place. And she would not have maybe thought of those stories. She remembered driving us to soccer practice and things. Maybe she wouldn't have thought of those stories if we hadn't been driving through our old neighborhood. But it brought back all these memories of, she recognized the streets and the context. That stuff is meaningful. Largely what I'm talking about is a shift in that context, where we understand that the cities where we live and grow and thrive and survive and seek out things affect us deeply, and we should acknowledge it. I think I get a little overly critical in that mode and say, well, we should change everything. Well, no, we need to slowly graft ideas onto this narrative of renewal and regrowth of American cities. If we are to make American cities beautiful, great places that the rest of the world strives to come visit and see for how wonderful they are, we need to deeply rethink the places that we're making. And I hope to continue to do that through these videos, and I really appreciate all of you watching and providing feedback. It's very meaningful to me, so thank you.